In September 2025, Burkina Faso was struck not by war, not by politics, but by something far more brutal: nature itself. Cyclone Yanenga, the deadliest storm in the history of West Africa, descended with no warning. Within 48 hours, rivers exploded, dams cracked, and entire provinces vanished underwater. Power stations drowned, roads disintegrated, 8 million citizens plunged into darkness. Children screamed from rooftops. Hospitals shut down mid-surgery. Food rotted in flooded markets. In the face of this apocalyptic chaos, the government made a desperate move, a plea for help. President Ibrahim Traoré sent urgent cables to Paris, Washington, Brussels. He didn't beg, he asked as a leader for solidarity for humanity. What he received was silence. France declined, citing internal budget constraints. The United States ignored. Europe offered sympathy and nothing more. It was not just aid that was denied. It was a denial of worth. The message was clear. You are on your own. Burkina Faso stood at the edge of collapse. Then, when hope should have died, something else was born. On national television, dressed not in military uniform, but in workers' overalls, Ibrahim Traoré stepped into the light and declared, "If the world denies us light, we shall build our own sun. If they will not give us water, then we will awaken the rivers buried beneath our soil." And in that moment, he unveiled the impossible Phoenix Dam, the longest hydroelectric dam in the history of Africa, a monument to survival, a rebellion against dependence, and the beginning of a revolution written in stone and water. It began with a whisper of water in Banzan, a small breach in a rural dam. Locals thought it was nothing, but within 2 hours the village was underwater. Roads vanished like chalk in a storm. Power lines collapsed, leaving black scars across the national grid. Over 60% of farmland, the very backbone of Burkina Faso's economy, was submerged in thick, choking mud. And that was only the beginning. In the Hurhosbasan region, the main hydroelectric plant short-circuited and exploded like a silent bomb. Entire provinces were plunged into darkness. Hospitals ran out of oxygen. Infants cried in darkened ICUs. Thousands stood in endless rain, begging for clean water. Police stations were cut off. Looting began at the city's edge. A peaceful nation spiraled into chaos in just 3 days. Faced with the collapse of the state, the government issued a national emergency and activated the diplomatic Red Channel. President Ibrahim Traoré, a man who had built his legacy on sovereignty and self-reliance, was now forced to do what he had long resisted. He asked the West for help. On September 10th, 3 letters left the presidential palace. To Paris, we urgently request rescue equipment and emergency food supply. Or, to Washington, please provide water filtration systems and medical support. To Brussels, we seek an air bridge for humanitarian aid. The answers: France responded with a single-line email. Regrettably, our emergency aid budget is fully allocated to higher priority regions. The United States said nothing. The EU released a generic press statement expressing deep sympathy and a vague promise to consider assistance in the near future. People called it what it was: betrayal. Western journalists arrived briefly, filming tears, not bringing clean water. In the makeshift shelters, the elderly and children lay on tarps under plastic sheets, listening to the rain pound like war drums. One man shouted through the downpour, "We don't need condolences, we need power, we need food." Opposition leaders seized the moment. They accused Traoré of arrogance, of gambling the nation's fate on his no-aid doctrine, of failing. But President Traoré made no speeches, no justifications, no rebuttals. He walked into flooded villages, shouldering sacks of rice, digging trenches with soldiers, his boots sinking in the same mud as the people. When the cameras were gone, he remained. Then, one stormy September night, he summoned his inner circle into an underground bunker, a former wartime command center beneath Ouagadougou. With the national map unfurled on the table, he pointed at a dry riverbed, cutting across the heart of the country. We asked. They refused. Now we dig. We dig to build. We dig to survive. No one fully understood what he meant, but the next morning, the entire nation woke up to a message, painted across every wall, every truck, every broadcast signal: the Phoenix will rise. At dawn on September 15, 2225, while Ouagadougou still slept under a blanket of silence, every TV, radio, and frequency across Burkina Faso came alive. There was no music, no dramatic visuals, just the steady, unshaken voice of President Ibrahim Traoré. They turned their backs on us. But the land is still here, the water still runs beneath our soil, and our people have not surrendered. It's time to build not just a dam, but a declaration that Burkina Faso will not die. And with those words, he unveiled the impossible: the Phoenix Dam Project, the longest hydroelectric dam in African history. A structure so massive, so unprecedented, that it shattered records, defied logic, and silenced every critic who ever said Africa could only survive on aid. A decision born of desperation transformed into destiny. This plan wasn't born in air-conditioned offices. It was sketched in mud-splattered maps under candlelight in an old underground war bunker. There were no Western consultants, no think tanks. Only young engineers from Ouagadougou University, military tacticians and rice farmers who had traded shovels for rulers and elevation meters. The Phoenix Dam would stretch over 200 kilometers, crossing the nation from Banfora to the banks of the Muhun River. It would store over 12 billion cubic meters of water, generate 6,000 megawatts of electricity, and irrigate 1 million hectares of farmland. Starting from zero, the world mocked it. French media called it Traoré's delusion of grandeur. The World Bank refused funding, but Traoré didn't flinch. He flew to Beijing, sealed technical cooperation deals with China and India, and secured heavy machinery engineers and satellite data without borrowing a cent. "We don't need loans," he said. "We need belief and hands." On September 20th, Chinese bulldozers, Indian seismographs, and Burkina's own military-grade drills rolled into the scorched southern plains. In the village of Galur, now ground zero for the revolution, villagers pitched tents beside machines, ready to work around the clock. Nobody waited for payment. Nobody asked for glory. A 60-year-old man named Musa, who had lost everything in the floods, said it best: "I'm not building this dam for the government. I'm building it so my grandchildren can plant roots in their own land. A dam of the people, not just of the state." Traoré ordered the creation of the People's Engineering Brigade, a massive civilian force of over 50,000 youth students, farmers, engineers, trained in just 3 weeks to operate machinery, manage hydrology, and maintain safety protocols. Each volunteer signed a declaration: "We don't build dams, we build futures." October became a month of transformation. Universities offered night courses in geotechnics. The army shared rations with workers. Teachers brought students on field trips, not to museums, but to construction trenches. Instead of textbooks, children held measuring tapes and dreamed of turbines. One photo went viral across Africa: President Traoré, shirtless, covered in dust, shovel in hand, digging beside students. No security, no international press. If we asked the people to sweat for the country, he said the leader must bleed first. Belief was reborn, and the old world began to tremble. News of the Phoenix Dam exploded across the continent. Mali, Togo, Niger sent letters requesting future power access. China doubled its technical team. India donated an AI-powered hydrological monitoring system. Even the European Union, once mocking, began to closely observe the progress. Inside Burkina Faso, miracles unfolded. Crime rates dropped by 28%. Labor productivity doubled. Illegal migration numbers plummeted, because for the first time in decades, the people had something real to believe in. A national purpose, a dream not imported, but handcrafted by their own calloused hands. The groundbreaking and a blood oath in Gouleur. On November 1, 2025, the Phoenix Dam was officially launched in a Spartan ceremony at Gouleur. There were no red ribbons, no fancy stages, just a single shovel, a clump of dry earth, and the voice of Traoré steady as granite. We will build this dam with our blood, our sweat, and our love. If need be, I will be the last man to leave this site after the final light is lit by the first drop of power. He raised the national flag, climbed onto the first concrete pillar, and planted it deep into wet cement, a marker not just of construction, but of rebirth. The world watched in disbelief. What began as an act of desperation had become a symbol of resurrection. The phoenix had begun to rise. When the first images of the Phoenix Dam emerged on social media, the world noticed. But the attention wasn't applause, it was suspicion. European media called it a military strongman's megalomaniac dream. Western think tanks compared Ibrahim Traoré to a tropical Nasser, hinting that his ambition threatened the old geopolitical order. Financial institutions warned of geopolitical debt entanglements if Burkina Faso continued deepening ties with China and India. But while the West condemned with headlines, the rest of the world responded with blueprints, boots, and belief. The birth of the No Permission Alliance. Within just 2 months of the dam's groundbreaking, more than 9 African nations formally reached out to collaborate, requesting access to Burkina Faso's methods, energy sharing frameworks, and most of all, their model of independence without aid. Countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Mali were the first to join what would soon be dubbed the Alliance of Water and Light, a regional pact spearheaded by Traoré to build mutual energy corridors from the Phoenix Dam across the Sahel. Then came a shockwave. In late November, South Africa declined to sign a memorandum with the International Monetary Fund, citing Burkina Faso's Phoenix model as proof that economic sovereignty must no longer be postponed. In Beijing, the Chinese government announced it would recognize Burkina Faso as its strategic hub for agricultural and energy technology transfer in West Africa. Meanwhile, India launched a new scholarship fund, the African Phoenix Fellowship, for young Burkinabe engineers to study in their top tech institutes. The West responds from dismissal to silent panic. By December 2025, the dam had completed its first operational phase. Electricity lit up previously dark villages in southern Burkina Faso. LED streetlights flickered on. Water pumps hummed. Children gathered around public screens, powered by solar-integrated turbines, watching themselves on national news. BBC aired a reluctant report. A quiet engineering marvel is rising in West Africa, and it carries no Western donor logo. The Washington Post editorial began bluntly, "If Traoré succeeds, we've already lost the influence war in Africa." In Brussels, a closed-door EU summit focused on strategic influence decay in the Sahel. A leaked memo from Paris revealed fears that if Phoenix worked, a domino effect of aid rejection could unravel European leverage across the continent. National pride reborn and the redefinition of patriotism. Inside Burkina Faso, the Phoenix Dam wasn't just an engineering feat. It became a sacred national emblem of independence. Murals appeared across schools with slogans like, "We don't ask permission to exist." Phoenix Dam modules were added to 5th grade science curricula. Folk songs emerged praising stone haulers and sleepless engineers. Farmers wrote slogans in irrigation channels. Youth wore t-shirts that read, "Our light, our future." Traoré didn't need rallies. The construction site was his campaign trail. Every concrete pour was a vote of trust. Every drop of flowing water a line in a national anthem yet to be written. One teacher in Bama told Al Jazeera, "We used to feel forgotten by the world, but now when I flick the switch and the light comes on, I know we've turned on our own future." Isolation turned into arsenal. What the West thought was a death sentence, the denial of aid, became a catalyst. Traoré didn't collapse. He channeled the rejection into a weapon, a united, disciplined, purpose-driven people. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg. He built. Every meter of dam laid was a rebuttal to every op-ed. Every turbine was a rejection of conditional loans. At the African Climate Conference, when asked how he felt about not being invited to the G20, Traoré smirked, "I don't need a seat at their table. I'm building my own out of stone, water, and the will of my people." 6 months after the first concrete was poured into the Phoenix Dam, something extraordinary began to unfold. The turbines had barely reached full capacity, yet the effects were already rippling across Burkina Faso, not just in the form of megawatts and irrigation, but in something far more vital: hope. The first light. It began in Galour, the dam's birthplace, a once-forgotten village ravaged by floodwaters, poverty, and silence. On the night of February 3, 2026, the dam's southern grid was activated. For the first time in the village's history, electric light bathed the homes of Galour. There were no fireworks, no speeches, only gasps. Children screamed in joy. Elders wept quietly. Radios crackled to life. Schools extended their hours. For the first time, students didn't have to memorize their lessons by candlelight or cook fires. In the nearby village of Tondagoso, a teenage girl named Aminata, whose family had survived the flood by climbing trees, now stood beneath a working street lamp, reading aloud from her science book, "Electricity is not magic. It is movement, just like hope." Her words went viral. The Fields Return by March water from Phoenix's massive irrigation system reached the once cracked farmlands of Banzan and Bama. Crops long abandoned due to drought began to return: maize, onions, tomatoes, and most notably rice. The Ministry of Agriculture, now dubbed the Ministry of Miracles by locals, estimated that over 185,000 hectares were brought back to life within the first quarter. Yields tripled in some zones thanks to synchronized planting cycles made possible by controlled irrigation. Markets in Ouagadougou buzzed again. Prices of staple foods dropped for the first time in 5 years. The country, once labeled a perennial food aid recipient, was now shipping surplus grain to neighboring Niger. A farmer named Salafou put it best: "The flood took our past. The dam gave us back our future." Jobs, pride, and returnees' employment exploded. Over 50,000 new jobs emerged, not just in construction, but in agriculture, logistics, energy, and water management. Young people who once risked death to cross the Mediterranean now returned, bringing new skills and a hunger to contribute. In a symbolic moment, a group of Burkinabe migrants from Italy returned to their homeland and joined a project to build solar irrigation pumps along the dam's distribution line. "We left chasing hope," one of them said. But Traoré brought hope home. A new identity was forming, not defined by survival, but by contribution. Vocational schools across the nation adopted a new motto: "Build your country, or someone else will build it for you." National health and water security. The Phoenix Dam wasn't just about energy. It was also a public health revolution. Water pipelines now connected to over 1,200 rural communities, bringing clean water to more than 3 million people. Incidences of waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery dropped by 60% within the first 6 months. For pastoral communities, the dam was a lifeline. Livestock mortality dropped sharply due to reliable watering stations. Milk and meat production soared. Conflicts between herders and farmers, once frequent and deadly, declined to near zero levels in regions served by Phoenix. At the National Hospital in Ouagadougou, a nurse smiled while checking water pressure from a new purification system. "We used to pray for rain. Now we plan around it." Unexpectedly, Phoenix became a magnet for tourism. Schools organized field trips. Universities sent students for research. Documentaries were filmed. A viewing platform was built on a cliffside overlooking the dam and was fully booked for 3 months. Burkina Faso, once absent from international development forums, was now the subject of keynote presentations. More importantly, The dam became a tool of diplomacy. Countries like Togo and Ghana signed energy-sharing agreements. Talks began to form a regional electric grid with Phoenix at the center. Burkina Faso was no longer just a receiver of policy, it was now shaping it. A psychological revolution. The greatest impact of the Phoenix Dam couldn't be measured in watts or liters, it was seen in the eyes of the people. People walked straighter, they spoke louder. For decades, aid dependency had been a silent wound, one that whispered, "You can't survive without them." But now, every drop of water, every bulb lit, every field harvested said otherwise. A national poll, conducted in April 2026, showed that 82% of Burkinabe believed their country could become food and energy self-sufficient by 2030, up from just 14% the year before. In classrooms, when children were asked who their heroes were for the first time in memory, the top answer wasn't a footballer or foreign president. It was my uncle who works on the dam. The woman engineer who fixed the floodgate, President Traoré. One symbol won. People. By mid-2026, the Phoenix emblem, a bird of flame, rising from waves, was everywhere on t-shirts, murals, passports, even wedding dresses. It wasn't propaganda, it was pride. Traoré himself avoided public celebration, he kept working. His only public comment during the Harvest Festival was brief. "We are not building a dam, we are rebuilding a nation. This is not just the story of a dam. This is the story of how a wounded nation stopped waiting for rescue and rescued itself. How a people long told they were poor, underdeveloped, dependent, stood up, dug deep, and rewrote their destiny with their bare hands and burning will." The Phoenix Dam was never just about electricity. It was never just about irrigation or infrastructure or even sovereignty. It was above all about belief, the kind of belief that can raise a generation, reshape a continent, and ignite a revolution. A nation rebuilt from the ground. Up in less than 2 years, Burkina Faso went from flood-stricken disaster to engineering marvel. From humanitarian headlines to energy diplomacy. From begging for food to planting surpluses. The same valleys that drowned its crops now fuel its rebirth. Children who once walked miles for water now drink from community pumps powered by the sun. Women who feared darkness now walk safely under streetlights. Families who lost everything now watch their homes flicker to life with clean, renewable power. The message is clear. Transformation does not come from charity, it comes from courage. Ibrahim Traoré. The architect of will history will remember many leaders. Some ruled with power, some with charisma, but Ibrahim Traoré will be remembered as the one who led with a shovel. He didn't promise riches, he didn't chase applause. He dug with his hands and his army and his people, and together they built something immortal. He didn't ask to be saved, he asked to build, and in that simple request a movement was born. They called him mad, they called him naive, but now across Africa he's called something else, the builder. "We don't copy their speeches," he once said. "We copy their canals, their turbines, their courage." And so he did, the global echo. Across the continent, others have taken notice. In Senegal, engineers study the Phoenix blueprints. In Niger, youth groups have formed Traoré brigades to restore dried riverbeds. In Ghana, school books now cite Burkina Faso not as a case study of need, but as an example of self-reliance. Even beyond Africa, nations quietly watch. Because the Phoenix didn't just rise in Burkina Faso, it rose in the imagination of every citizen tired of waiting, every country tired of dependency, every leader tired of being told you can't. The Phoenix says we can, we did, and we will again. Not the end, but a beginning. The turbines will keep spinning, the fields will keep blooming, the people will keep building. But the true legacy of Phoenix is still being written not in concrete, but in culture, in classrooms, in consciousness. It is being written every time a child dreams not of escaping their country, but of improving it. Every time a farmer invests in seeds instead of praying for rain. Every time a citizen pays their electric bill, not with resentment but with pride, because they know where that energy came from. And in that pride, a new kind of patriotism is born, not the kind wrapped in flags, but rooted in function, in roads, in crops, in light. A message to the world. To every nation still waiting on foreign aid, build anyway. To every leader afraid of failure, try anyway. To every young person told to leave their homeland, believe anyway. You don't need permission to change your future. You don't need applause to build your nation. You only need purpose and the courage to begin. The Phoenix was never just a dam, it was a defiance, a declaration, a drumbeat of destiny echoing across a continent, once silenced by colonizers, corrupted by debt and crippled by doubt. Burkina Faso has shown that the real revolution is not in protests or promises, but in pipes and plows and plans that become action. Call to action. To our viewers across Africa and beyond, if this story moved, you share it. Let it reach the student in Nairobi who dreams of building canals. Let it reach the farmer in Malawi tired of drought. Let it reach the president still afraid to dream too big. Let the world see that Africa is not waiting. Africa is building. Like, subscribe, spread the word. Because the revolution is no longer televised, it's operational. Final words: on the walls of the Phoenix Dam, workers carved a phrase into the concrete during construction. No one ordered them to, no one paid them to, but every visitor stops to read it. It says simply, "We built this so no child here will ever build a boat to leave." And in that single line lies a nation's heartbeat. Long live the builders, long live the Phoenix, long live Burkina Faso. The story of the Phoenix Dam is more than an engineering triumph. It is a case study in national resilience, leadership under pressure, and the power of belief in the face of abandonment. From this story emerge profound lessons not only for African nations, but for every society grappling with inequality, dependency, and the legacy of colonialism. 1. True sovereignty is built, not given. One of the clearest lessons is that sovereignty is not a gift handed down from powerful nations, it is earned through action. President Ibrahim Traoré's refusal to collapse under the weight of foreign indifference demonstrated that independence is forged in moments of crisis. While many countries wait for external rescue, Burkina Faso chose to build. It is a powerful reminder: nations that wish to own their future must create the foundations themselves through industry, infrastructure, and internal unity. 2. Leadership is measured by sacrifice, not rhetoric. When disaster struck, Traoré did not retreat to palaces or deliver empty press statements. He went into the mud with his people, he dug, he carried, he stood beside the workers. This is leadership not as performance, but as presence. Not as spectacle, but as solidarity. The global lesson here is stark in a world of performative governance. The most effective leaders are those willing to sweat before they speak. 3. Rejection can be a catalyst, not a defeat. The West's denial of aid could have triggered collapse. Instead, it sparked innovation. The story proves that rejection is not always a setback, it can be fuel. By refusing to view abandonment as the end, Burkina Faso transformed pain into power. This shift in mindset from victimhood to ownership is one of the most transferable lessons for developing nations. The message is clear: don't let the door slammed in your face stop you. Let it be the spark to build your own house. 4. Infrastructure is political power. The Phoenix Dam is not merely about electricity, it is a declaration of power in the geopolitical sense. Energy, water, and food security are no longer optional. They are the core components of modern independence. By building this dam, Burkina Faso took control of its most basic resources, and with them, its destiny. This should shift how developing nations approach infrastructure, not as donor-funded charity, but as the backbone of political freedom. 5. Youth are a nation's strongest asset. If given purpose, rather than seeing young people as a problem to manage or a mass to export through migration, Burkina Faso saw them as its primary builders. The creation of the People's Engineering Brigade gave young citizens not just work but meaning. This approach flipped the narrative from dependency to dignity. For countries battling brain drain or youth unrest, the Phoenix model shows that purpose, not just employment, is the key to national engagement. 6. Technological sovereignty is possible without Western approval. The Phoenix Dam was designed and executed with zero Western funding. Instead, Burkina Faso partnered with nations like China and India, not for loans, but for technical cooperation. More importantly, they trained their own engineers, relied on domestic universities, and deployed local innovation. The lesson: technological progress does not require permission. It requires courage, strategy, and a refusal to accept the myth that progress must be imported. 7. Disaster can be an opportunity for reinvention. Natural disasters often destroy more than infrastructure, they erode public morale. But in this case, the storm became a turning point. The floods that nearly washed the nation away also cleansed it of dependency. From that chaos emerged a national identity anchored in productivity, not pity. The takeaway: adversity can be transformative if met with clear vision and collective will. 8. Narratives are as important as blueprints. Burkina Faso didn't just build a dam, it told a story. The Phoenix wasn't marketed as a project, it became a mythos, a rallying cry, a shared national metaphor. This is a key lesson in movement: building infrastructure must be paired with inspiration. For political leaders, it's a reminder that public works must speak to the public's heart, not just to development indicators. 9. Patriotism can be functional, not symbolic. Too often, patriotism is reduced to flags and anthems, but the Phoenix Dam redefined it through action. Patriotism became about showing up to work, lifting cement, checking pressure gauges, and helping your neighbor. It became a practice, not just a posture. This shows that love of country does not require war or pageantry. It can be built quietly through daily determined effort. Ultimately, the story of the Phoenix Dam teaches us that belief is the most renewable energy source in the world. When institutions collapse, belief rebuilds. When the world turns its back, belief looks inward. And when people are told they are incapable, belief responds with action. Burkina Faso's belief in itself changed its fate. That belief didn't come from speeches. It came from one man picking up a shovel and millions following suit. Burkina Faso was not the richest country in Africa. It had no major natural resource exports, no powerful allies, and no seat at global summits. But it had people, it had vision, and most importantly, it had the will to try. The Phoenix Dam story is not just about a country in West Africa. It is about every place where dignity has been denied, where hands are calloused from waiting, and where the future feels outsourced. It is a story that reminds us, you don't need to be wealthy to be worthy. You don't need permission to build. You don't need applause to begin. You only need belief and a blueprint. That is the lesson Burkina Faso has gifted the world. Across the African continent and far beyond, the story of the Phoenix Dam struck a deep emotional chord. Viewers from all walks of life reacted not with passive admiration, but with a renewed sense of purpose. For many, this was the first time they had witnessed an African nation respond to disaster, not with dependency, but with dignity. Their comments poured in, reflective, hopeful, sometimes tearful, and almost always personal. In Kenya, a university lecturer described how she paused a lesson midway through the Phoenix broadcast. She and her students sat in silence, watching Traoré dig beside the villagers. Afterward, one student simply said, "This is what they never taught us in school, how to believe in ourselves." The professor later added that she planned to include the Phoenix Project in her syllabus, calling it a modern African case study in applied courage. In Ghana, a young entrepreneur expressed how the story changed his outlook. For years, he had been discouraged from developing off-grid energy solutions because donors and banks considered them unrealistic. But after watching the Phoenix Dam rise from floodwaters, he wrote, "I now realize I wasn't dreaming too big. I was surrounded by people dreaming too small." His new startup is now named Phoenix Solar Ghana. From South Africa, a retired schoolteacher wrote about watching the lights come on in Galur. She admitted that she had never cried watching the news before. But something in that moment, the joy on children's faces, the quiet dignity of old men wiping their eyes, broke her. She said it reminded her that real progress is not measured by foreign applause, but by the brightness in a child's eyes. In Burkina Faso itself, reactions were even more intimate. A young woman from the village of Galur, one of the first areas to receive power from the dam, wrote that her grandmother had lived her entire life without electricity. The night the lights came on, the old woman simply said, "I can finally die knowing you will live better than I did." For that granddaughter, the Phoenix Dam was not a project. It was a generational promise kept. A public policy analyst in Nigeria described the Phoenix model as a geopolitical earthquake. He reflected on how the project had shaken the assumptions of Western development frameworks. In his words, "We used to measure progress by how much aid we received. Now, we measure it by how much we can build without it." An Ethiopian student activist, inspired by Traoré's leadership style, began organizing study groups around the Phoenix blueprint. He believed that young Africans needed to understand that the path to liberation was not just in resisting colonizers, but in constructing systems. "The dam is not resistance through words," he said, "it is resistance through infrastructure." In Paris, a member of the Burkinabe diaspora watched the story with mixed emotions. She felt pride, but also guilt for having left a country she once believed had no future. Now, she said, she was buying a plane ticket home, not to visit but to stay and contribute. "Burkina Faso is no longer the country I fled," she wrote. "It is now the country I must return to." From Senegal, a high school teacher shared how his students now ask to learn about engineering and agriculture instead of fashion and football. He observed a visible shift in their aspirations. "They no longer dream of escape," he said. "They dream of improvement." In Germany, an African-American historian stated that the Phoenix Dam was the most important act of African self-determination he had seen in decades. He emphasized that its significance extended beyond Burkina Faso, serving as proof that black nations can build grand projects without conditional aid, and that belief, not loans, is the most powerful currency. An architect in Morocco praised the aesthetics of the dam, calling it a monument that speaks. To him, it was more than just functional, it was poetic. He remarked that its symmetry, the integration of local materials, and the murals along the irrigation walls turned it into a living piece of national identity. Back in Ouagadougou, a construction volunteer recounted the moment the first turbine came online. There was no celebration, he said, just quiet amazement. He remembered looking at his calloused hands, then at the glowing homes across the hills, and thinking, "We did this. Not the UN, not France, us." He believes this sense of authorship changed the soul of the nation. A mother in Uganda described how her young son, after watching the documentary, drew a picture of a dam and wrote